For years, Daniel hadn't seen many people. That was exactly how he wanted it. But everything changed the morning. He found a letter nailed to his gate. For 8 years, Daniel had lived off-grid on a piece of land far away from city traffic, crowded neighborhoods, and anyone else's rules. There was no HOA, no monthly fees, and no one interfering with the life he had built for himself. Just peace, just hard work, just a quiet existence he had created with his own hands. That morning, sunlight filtered through the trees as Daniel stepped outside, expecting another ordinary day. Instead, a bright white notice fluttered against his wooden gate. It looked like a warning, one he had never asked for. Final notice: $47,000 due in HOA fees. Daniel stared at the paper. At first, he was confused. Then he almost laughed. How could that possibly be real? His property sat miles away from any official neighborhood or subdivision. But as he continued reading, his amusement disappeared. The notice contained threats, liens, legal action, forced compliance. This wasn't a simple clerical error. Someone genuinely believed he owed the money. Daniel tightened his grip on the paper as an uneasy feeling settled into his chest. After years of living in complete isolation, something had finally found him, and deep down, he knew this wasn't just a random letter. It was the beginning of a fight he never expected. Daniel wasn't the type to panic. He never had been. Still, something about the situation felt wrong. That afternoon, he walked the perimeter of his property. His boots crunched across gravel as he carefully examined every familiar landmark and boundary. Everything looked exactly the same, except for one thing. A new metal sign had appeared near the dirt road leading to his land. Private community, HOA enforced. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. That sign definitely hadn't been there the day before. Later that afternoon, a black SUV drove down the road, breaking a silence that had existed for years. A professionally dressed woman stepped out carrying a clipboard. Her expression was calm, confident, controlled. She introduced herself as a representative of the Homeowners Association. Her words were polite, but there was an unmistakable coldness beneath them. According to her records, Daniel's property had recently become part of a newly developed residential community nearby. That meant he was now subject to HOA rules, HOA fees, and HOA authority. Daniel slowly shook his head. This land belonged to me long before your development existed. The woman didn't argue. She simply smiled. That doesn't change the amount you owe. Then she returned to her vehicle and drove away. As the dust settled behind her SUV, Daniel stood silently. For 8 years he had been invisible. Now, suddenly, someone was trying to claim him. That evening, Daniel dug through documents he hadn't touched in years. Property deeds, survey maps, purchase records. Every document proving ownership. He spread everything across his wooden table, while lantern light flickered across the pages. The paperwork told a very different story than the letter. There was no HOA, no shared development, no agreement connecting his land to anyone else. So how could they possibly claim authority over him? The next morning, Daniel drove into town for the first time in months. The quiet forest gradually gave way to paved roads and newly built neighborhoods. That's when he saw it. A massive residential development had been constructed just beyond his property line. Clean streets, rows of nearly identical homes, perfectly maintained lawns. This was clearly the community mentioned in the letter. But something immediately caught his attention. At the far edge where the development met his property, several fences looked oddly placed. The lines weren't straight. They seemed careless, almost rushed. Daniel narrowed his eyes. What if this wasn't simply a misunderstanding? What if the developers had built something they weren't supposed to build, and now they needed him to cooperate? Suddenly, the demand for $47,000 felt much less random. It felt like pressure. Daniel returned home with a plan. He wasn't interested in arguing without evidence. He wanted proof. The next day, he hired an independent land surveyor. The service cost more money than he liked spending, but he knew it would be worth it. When the surveyor arrived, they spent hours measuring boundaries, reviewing records, and comparing official maps against the physical landscape. By sunset, The results were undeniable. The HOA development hadn't merely expanded close to Daniel's property. It had crossed onto it. Several sections of fencing, multiple pathways, even part of a shared recreational area. All of it sat on Daniel's land. He stared at the survey markers as the truth finally became clear. The HOA wasn't demanding money because he belonged to them. They were demanding money because they were afraid of him. If he challenged them, the entire development could face serious legal consequences. That was the moment everything clicked. This had never been about collecting fees. It was about hiding a mistake. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He let them wait. Several days passed. Then another letter arrived. This one was even more aggressive. Stronger legal language, tighter deadlines, more threats. They were clearly becoming desperate. So Daniel did something they never expected. He invited them to his property. When the HOA representative returned, she appeared confident. She looked as though she expected another simple conversation. This time, however, Daniel wasn't empty-handed. He placed the survey results on the table. Calmly, precisely, without emotion. At first she attempted to dismiss the findings. But the further she read, the more her expression changed. Her confidence faded. The calm exterior began to crack. Daniel never raised his voice. He never argued. He simply looked at her and said, "You built on my land." The room fell silent. For the first time, the balance of power had shifted, and she knew it. Within days, everything changed. The threatening letters stopped. The HOA began sending emails instead. Requests, explanations, even apologies. Their tone was completely different now. They talked about cooperation, resolution, working together toward a solution. But Daniel understood exactly what they really wanted. They didn't want a solution. They wanted silence. Because if the situation became public, the damage wouldn't be limited to money. It could affect the reputation of the entire development. Daniel stood at the edge of his property, looking at the structures they had placed where they never should have been. For 8 years, he had asked nothing from anyone. Now, suddenly, they needed something from him. And for the first time, he held the advantage. The final meeting was brief. There were no arguments, no threats, just reality. Daniel agreed to settle the matter, but only under his conditions. The HOA would remove every structure built on his land. They would pay every cost involved. And the $47,000 demand would disappear completely. Gone. Erased. But there was one more requirement. They had to legally acknowledge their mistake. Not publicly, not for publicity, but permanently and officially. As the final documents were signed, the same woman who had once stood confidently at his gate refused to meet his eyes. The silence spoke louder than words. That evening, Daniel returned home. He stood once again in the peace he had built for himself. The forest remained unchanged. The land remained unchanged. But something inside him had changed. After 8 years of being ignored, he had reminded them exactly who owned that property. And that became the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. If you enjoyed the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps support the channel.